So the study we're presenting here at EHA today in the Presentation Symposium is a study looking at measurable residual disease in patients who are enrolled on a randomized phase 3 trial called BMT-CTN0901. So this was a trial that was conducted between 2011 and 2014, trying to answer the question of which conditioning regimen prior to stem cell transplant is preferable, myeloablation or reduced intensity. That study actually showed a very high relapse rate in patients who got reduced intensity conditioning for AML prior to a transplant. And so ours was a lab study looking to see were there any patients who were particularly at risk from getting a reduced intensity transplant. And we used next generation sequencing to try and look for evidence of residual disease in those patients prior to transplant. The phase 3 trial was completed in 2014, and fortunately they had banked samples from patients on that trial. So they had peripheral blood samples stored from immediately before the time of conditioning for transplant. And so we were able to get, of the 228 AML patients enrolled on that phase 3 trial, we were able to get samples from 190 of those patients. And so we're presenting here the study using next generation sequencing on those 188 of those 190 samples to look for genomic evidence of residual leukemia. We know that leukemia is a genetic disease. It has heterogeneous mutations. And so we looked at a small panel of 13 genes which are commonly seen in leukemia and saw was there any evidence of those variants present at a low level in these patients who are otherwise in remission. The results are very clear and definitive, which is why we're delighted to put in a late-breaking abstract, and we're very happy that that was selected. So the results clearly show that those patients who have detectable residual disease prior to transplant really seem to benefit from having myeloablative conditioning. So the group who are variant positive prior to reduced intensity conditioning in this sample of a randomized trial had increased relapse rate, decreased disease-free survival, and decreased overall survival. And so there's a group that's of the 4 possible combinations of the 2 conditioning arms and the 2 levels of residual disease prior to transplant. There's a group that's at very high risk there, which really gives us an opportunity to really focus in on why they're at such high risk. It's for others to say how this changes the clinical standard, but I think one of the things as a leukemia doc that's exciting to me is this idea that we've now identified the group of patients who are at highest risk getting a reduced intensity transplant. And so I think importantly, those who didn't have variants detected had equal survival whether they got a reduced intensity or a myeloablative transplant. It was only those who had variants detected that seemed to be harmed by getting a reduced intensity transplant. So really now we can really focus in on future trials on that group who seems at highest risk and try and do something better for those patients.